Hello and welcome everyone to our lecture today titled Risk and the Resilient Governance Leader, Leading Through an Effective Risk Management Strategy. Another very important topic in this series of monthly webinars that we talk about that relate back to leadership and board directorship and all these applicable areas to senior leadership. So welcome, glad to have you with us today. A few quick webinar reminders before we do our intro. Purpose, first of all, to share knowledge and benefits of how an effective director should approach risk. Please write your questions in the Q&A section. Our goal is to answer all questions at the close of the presentation. Otherwise, we'll follow up with you via email afterwards. Materials, this question always comes up. Yes, the entire webinar is being recorded and you will receive a link via email shortly. That'll be within the next day or two. And this link will also include the ability to view and download the presentation deck in its own separate file. For those of you with the IBDC.D certification, you will receive your 1 CPE credit by attending today's webinar. All right, Ellen, I know you are with us today. You can come on screen and unmute, and let me do your amazing intro for you. It's a pleasure working with you on this project for this month. So welcome to Ellen, President of Strategic Risk Frameworks, an independent risk advisory firm focused on strategic enterprise risk programs and assessments in resilience and crisis management, cybersecurity risk assessments, and education. Ellen has served in multiple chief risk officer roles as well as director of risk management, and Ellen holds an associate of risk management ARM designation. Ellen, it's such a pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
Great. Looking forward to all of your interesting topics today as well. I am your host, Mark Pfister. I am a governance and strategy expert, a non-executive director and chief board consultant of M.A. Pfister Strategy Group. Many of you may know me by my book, Across the Board, and I also am the creator and the implementer of the International Board Director Competency Designation. Very proud of that. Ellen, let's get you kicked off. If you can give us the overview and what we want to walk away with today's webinar, the journey you're going to bring us on, and then feel free to jump right into it. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Mark, and to the audience as well for taking time today. We would like to look at the governance perspective on risk and talk about why you should focus on risk, how important it is, discuss a little bit about what risk is, what it means to you, and look at the key functions for operational risk and how you can ask questions of your team to improve that area for your own entity. We also want to look at the impact of a risk-aware culture because you're leaders in helping to set that culture, and then also talk about valuable questions that you can ask your team. In terms of the focus on risk, it's important that board members understand that really you should have a strong risk program because it's important to focus on risk before an incident occurs or an opportunity missed so that you'll be more prepared to manage it when, not if, it occurs. Think about some of the things that you think about in proactive risk management. You're there to protect the interest of your stakeholders and leverage that to the extent possible. You're there to protect your reputation. And if you do that, you'll protect your bottom line for those shareholders. It's important that you also protect, I always look at if you can protect the life safety, the finances, the reputation, the operation, and assets that are consistent with any organization, you will have a greater opportunity to better your entity and its profile for your stakeholders. So what is risk? There was a meeting several years ago where both Condoleezza Rice and Madeleine Albright, two secretaries of state for the US, were in the same room. They were actually very good friends. And Madeleine said something that really has resonated with me regarding risk ever since. And it was that certainty, the difference between certainty and uncertainty and being able to manage it is that with certainty, we know that something is going to occur. So if we know the sun is going to rise and the sun is going to set every day, and that is certain, we know how to prepare for that. But for uncertainty, which some people call risk uncertainty, we need to be better prepared with the fundamentals of what we do. And if you are prepared fundamentally, you will be able to manage whatever that uncertainty is, things that we may not have thought of yet. Risk can also be described as circumstances by some academics. In many cases, and I've talked to several people, they are afraid of the term risk, or it is a negative term to them, so they don't address it. They either try to skirt it or they would rather just not talk about it. We really think that you have to find a way to communicate that works with your entity, and in some cases, describing risk as circumstances that can prohibit you from reaching your goals is a good way to do it. We also look at risk versus audit. Most boards have audit committees. Honestly, I think that it would be beneficial to have a risk committee as well, because auditors tend to identify risks, but they don't tend to necessarily resolve the risk. That's not their role. They send it back to the risk owner. And risk managers, however, or risk advisory actually is focused on making sure that we get proper tools and things embedded in that risk to make sure that we do see a marked improvement on it. That is something that is done through strategic enterprise risk, commonly known as ERM or enterprise risk. But I like to call it strategic enterprise risk because we start with the strategy, looking at your strategy and risk associated with it, which is why I really like what Mark is doing and his structure of his program. Risk can be better identified through a simple process. It's really similar to ISO 31000, which is identify the risk, assess it, decide what you're going to do to improve it, implement that treatment, if you will, monitor, and then reassess and repeat. It doesn't have to be overly complicated. And this is also very similar to the ISO 2701, which is cybersecurity. Next, we want to talk a little bit about what is risk from a governance perspective. So what are some of the things that you as governance professionals might think about versus the risk advisor might be thinking about? So the priority certainly is to have some sort of strategic risk program that really scans the landscape, both internally of your organization and externally. And then you can prioritize what needs to be done and the exposures or the potential risks that are vulnerable. With that, the governance side can support those efforts and focus on the wants versus the needs of an entity. We are seeing with digital transformation where people need to update their older systems that may be more than 5 or 10 years old. And some people are there was an airline using older systems this past winter. And while a great airline company, it did fail. And many people were impacted by this. So if your team is telling you we need something and yet maybe a board member wants something else, try to listen to your team because they know their infrastructure better and try to support that. We also look at different metrics, loss trend analysis. We'll talk a little bit about that and how certain metrics or certain tools and reports can actually provide insight into how your team is performing. You can look at trending analysis over 3 to 5 years and see different incidents that may be reoccurring on a regular basis. I've been in a situation where things were reoccurring and been known as the fix-it person because I don't like to see it continue on for no particular reason. So it's important to make sure you have someone fixing those things that are identified through the loss trend analysis. Conduct risk assessments for various types of activity is another area that is priority for risk. How can you help? The Chief Risk Officer report, and you should get a Chief Risk Officer report for your entity or a Risk Officer report on a regular basis. That may be quarterly, semi-annually, or annually, or different forms throughout the year, but they can give you the highlights of their various metrics associated with the detail in risk. It's also important that an entity can conduct regular training, and everyone really is a risk manager within your organization. And if you have that, you can have a better risk-aware culture, which from the governance standpoint can then also help prevent losses that cost money to the bottom line. Communication. I should just repeat that several times. Communication, communication. Open communication and transparency is so important. Make sure from the governance side that there are no files in the president's office that they have tried to hold secret and not get to the insurer or get to the proper people to manage a situation that could be embarrassing. Support your executive leadership. Ask sometimes, one of my favorite questions asked of me was not what was in the report, but what was not actually mentioned in the report. And my supervisor and I had a couple things that we shared verbally to the board. Collaborate with risk owners by helping them improve, and then ask for reports to make sure that it is getting done. Be nimble. One of my favorite leaders of an organization had run a very large Fortune 50 company, and he always maintained have a very broad swath of what you're doing, but be nimble, be ready to pivot. And then last but not least, help manage the strong and resilient culture of your organization so that you have a well-oiled machine, you have a very good machine if something goes wrong, and you know how to manage it. Trust your team. That's another thing I've heard, particularly from COVID. Trust the boots on the ground to be able to make decisions, but you have to train that. You have to make sure you have consistency, you have talking points, and you're all on the same page, and you have to be able to trust and execute that, but trust your people on the ground. The president doesn't have the time or always able to make every single decision. Trust your people in the field. So when we look at an operational risk program, there are three key areas that every organization should have. And one is the risk transfer or the purchase of insurance. Secondly, risk retention. What are you going to retain or manage under the insurance layer? And then third, risk control. For more mature organizations, you will have stronger risk control over time. It doesn't happen overnight, but the stronger your risk control, the more risk you can take in terms of purchasing insurance and maybe take higher retentions. So let's talk about each of these a little more in depth. So for risk transfer, we want to provide a schedule of insurance, and we have an example of that. I've been into many organizations where they didn't have this and had probably 25 or 30 insurance policies. It's really important that you maintain that schedule so that boards can see it and feel confident in the types of coverage and the limits of liability. AM Best rating is a lot like a Standard & Poor for the insurance institute or insurance organizations. And the insurance companies have a rating of how well they are able to pay, which is a letter rating. And then there are Roman numerals. So you may have an A+ rating, meaning you have the ability to pay claims for your clients, and a 7 rating or something showing that you have a very strong financial organization as well. But aside from that, you want to keep that updated. You want to identify emerging risks on a regular basis. And we're seeing certainly AI, Internet of Things, Meta, active shooters, cybersecurity are all fairly recent and very important emerging risks. Embedding risk mitigation into existing processes. We're not about trying to create a new wheel or create a new process to manage risk. We really want to try to be effective and lean and work with you to make sure that your organization is embedding the best processes. And that may, it may be additional training. It may be an additional review on a contract. but you can do things to avoid adverse incidents. And that may be just a proper checklist or process of some sort to improve what you're doing. Identifying a risk appetite. A risk appetite can be it can be decided through a lot of different means, but it really is, what is your ability to pay below, what is your risk appetite to take a loss, essentially? How much are you willing to lose? And so therefore, how much you take in terms of retention in your insurance policies is somewhat driven by the risk appetite. It also applies to if you're doing emerging risks or you're doing new technology of some sort. How much are you willing to take, how much of a risk in order to make that happen? And that varies. It varies by entrepreneurial versus corporate, et cetera. But it is unique to the individual company. Let's remember also that insurance is tied to financial markets. And so when you're making more money in terms of interest rates in the bank, and insurers have to carry certain amounts of monies that are fairly liquid to be able to pay for claims. When you're making money off of that due to interest rates, you may have fewer or lower premiums. And so you have a little tug of war between the insurance premiums, et cetera, the premiums and interest rates. But you also are graded on your own loss experience, your industry experience, and financial markets. So keep that in mind as you're looking at insurance rates. This slide shows the schedule of insurance I was talking about earlier. So you have the line of coverage that you're protecting, whether it's property, workers' comp, you could have kidnap and ransom, cybersecurity, et cetera. What are you protecting? And then the insurer, and these are all hypothetical insurers. We have the AM Best rating we talked about here. If you see an A minus something, you would never want to go with that insurer. Although there are circumstances quite unique in which some insurers do get there, but not long term. We also would look at the effective date to and from, or from and to for your policy, and then the limit of liability. Is it 2 million? Is it 2 billion for property? Is it also, we say that let's look at the general liability, for example, 2 million per occurrence and 4 million aggregate. And that could mean 2 million on one incident, or you could have 4 million total for the sum of the year. So look at the types of losses you have and what fits your industry, what fits your entity, as to how much insurance you need. Generally, 2 million, 4 million, or 1 million per occurrence with a $5 million umbrella. Generally 6 to 10 million is fairly standard for a small to medium sized company. Larger companies may have 100 million, 200 million in various layers of insurance. In terms of retention, again, that depends on your company, how much you're willing to pay out of your own pocket before it hits the insurance layer. And then how much are your premiums per year? Often the insurance or risk program itself can be somewhere in the 3 to 6% layer, or 3 to 6% total of your revenue. And it's great if you can keep it lower than that as well. Let's talk about risk retention. So what happens before the insurance gets involved? And I will say beneath the insurance coverage layer. There are two things. One is the retention is an area that you will manage the claims. Deductibles are managed like or through the insurance company, much like your car. The retention level is something that more mature programs, larger programs, you may have a $500,000 in retention for property insurance, for example, for a large entity. This is also where the risk control, your training, your inspections, your checklists, all of this count towards being able to leverage your program against how much you pay in premiums. So if you have a strong risk control program, we'll go more into that in a minute, you can retain a little more, therefore saving some dollars in your retention or your transfer or your premiums that you're paying. So make your culture a risk-aware culture. It's more proactive and more beneficial to your entity over time. And then zero deductibles are not necessary, particularly if you have a large premium you're paying and a well-run organization. The ability to take, for example, in property insurance, a larger retention can help greatly in terms of how you manage risk and your premiums. The board should also understand the ultimate loss or triangular report. We're going to show you one. But it's good to just have a high level understanding of that and how long it takes to pay out claims. Risk is something that goes, it's more accrued over year and not something that is like your normal balance sheet that is open and closed each year, as you would see in your regular accounting or GAAP accounting. This is the triangular report. And so the top level is showing the paid losses, and in this case, mostly closed losses, it appears. You will notice there are about 10 years and then 10 years on the upper horizontal level as well, but 10-year on the left side for each section. The top section is showing you how much you paid out in the first 12 months, and then the next column's 24, 36, 48, etc. months, going out to 120 months. What it means in this particular case is they had, if you were to look at this very closely, a few of these claims were still open 10 years later. There is an adage in risk and insurance that the more promptly you can close something successfully, the better and the least expensive it is for you. That's not to say you want to just close claims. You want to defend those claims that you really need to protect your reputation and your organization. But that's probably 5% of the claims. The other 95% of the claims generally have a bell curve of open and closing that would really be the first year very low. The second year, you would maybe double your payments. The third year, et cetera, the heightened area of the bell curve, and really close everything out within 5 years. If you can do that, you're running a pretty efficient and successful program. But this on the 120 or on the far right corner, if you add up the two, then you'll get the maximum ultimate losses down at the very bottom. Your actuaries will be the ones to take you through this and apply all of the financial metrics to it. But it's important that you understand what is the average length of time, one, that claims are reported to the risk group, and what is the average length of time that they are open until they're closed. You can carve that out in many different ways, but it's a good question, just a good high level question to ask. And if they say we keep things open 7 years on a normal basis, for most industry, that's not normal. So just something to keep in mind. We also look at, and these come from a risk report to a board, the quarterly update. And so on the left-hand side, the lower number is 2,100 or 2.1 million. On the upper level, it is the paid amount. So the lower level is the reserve, and then the upper level is the paid amount. And so it's showing you that you've paid 1.8 or 1.3 million, I believe, in paid claims, but you still have 2.1 to pay other claims. And this is from your expected losses. When your actuaries look at things like your triangular report and apply interest rates, CPI, and different, use about 3 different models, they will come up with something called the expected losses for the year. We're going to look at another report on that in a minute, but you will have, you can sometimes budget for that expected loss. So if you think you're going to spend $4 million in expected losses this year, you can put some of that in reserves and then just draw down from it essentially. The other thing that we look at are the property and casualty claims frequency, or the count of claims by claim type. We'll look at general liability, D&O, directors and officers coverage. That's for you, the board. The auto liability, property insurance, and other of your 30 claims. And you can see the pie chart showing where the bulk of your claims are, really with general liability and D&O. We'll talk about those in a minute. And then the percent claims opened versus closed. This is another tracking of how quickly are you working on closing your claims. Again, close the ones you can close quickly. Don't leave them hanging out there for 7 to 10 years. One thing that I started using with legal was requiring those long-term claims that were held open for the regular monthly billing to come in with the matter total in addition to the monthly bill. Because if you see, you know, $100,000 bill on it from a legal firm once a month, that's big enough. But if you see that the matter is already at $1.3 million, that raises eyebrows and maybe encourages everyone to get that thing closed as quickly as possible. So just a couple other hints for you. Here from the actuary report, you will see the light green at the top, which is the expected losses based on your history and that of the industry. And so the light green, the top 3 light green bars actually add up to the total green bar down below. And so we're looking at casualty, which is everything but property and work comp. Then we look at property, and then we look at workers' comp. We also then look at what are the actual losses. And this kind of a bar chart can show where you are at different times and stages in the year. So it's a good way to show your board at a snapshot. And maybe this is Q3, or this is a 12-month, or could be a 48-month or 36-month valuation. But it can show you where you stand. And right now you still have incurred fewer losses on that bottom blue line than were expected for the total year. So that's good. When we talk about risk control, we're talking about different types of mitigation training. Various examples are shown here. Right now, we see a lot of activity in the sexual harassment, and within the D&O area, there are wrongful acts that could be committed by the board. So you do have protection with D&O coverage. There are other types of training that certainly cybersecurity, social media, and within that social engineering, where someone pretends to be you, the board member, saying we need to take action on something. And usually it's to cut a check for a couple $1 million and send it to somewhere that no one checks and verifies. So social engineering is something part of the social or cybersecurity that you really need to make sure you've got great policies and procedures. There are many losses in the millions associated with that. Another thing that I'll highlight here, be sure that claims are reported on time. Occurrence-based are when they occur. So a fire, a flood, an auto accident, whereas claims made are associated with your directors and officers' liability. Claims made is something that you will see, again, that file box in the president's office that something occurred and they haven't reported it anywhere. And what it means is the activity itself, say the harassment, whether it's discrimination or harassment, may have been going on for 2 or 3 years, and someone finally makes a lawsuit or a claim against it. So the claim is made when the complaint is brought forward. Those are usually hard-fought cases and challenging and difficult for everybody involved, but with transparency and communication, going back to some of our earlier discussion, you can avoid really bad experience with that. Let's look a little more at some training checklists. We've got HR manuals, which can be 30, 40 pages, and you really want your new employees to understand what is going on within your organization and sign it and agree to it. Social media protocols for cyber and reputation risk are important. Every endpoint that you have, every phone, every iPad, every laptop is an endpoint among many other things that can go wrong or be hacked. So you really need to make sure your team understands that. Plus, how they are viewed on social media and their actions and activities, either on the job or off the job. And you may have different protocols that you expect of your employees, particularly on the job. Legal contracts, having a good legal contract process with review by risk is very important. They do not teach risk management and insurance in most law schools, and I have learned a lot from some great lawyers. They've told me they've learned a lot from me in terms of looking at contracts from an indemnification and an insurance standpoint. Have a professional risk manager look at those because they can help you down the road. The first place they'll go if you have an incident is to that contract. Insurance and indemnification, we just talked about that. Driving, background checks. You want to know if you really want to have the background check to avoid having people with a bad past working in your organization. You want to also make sure that colleagues are treated correctly. We hear a lot about DEI right now, diversity, equity, and I like to say equality and inclusion. And DEI is a very, very hot topic right now. And then sustainability, anti-bribery, modern slavery, all of these kind of things are up front and center on lawyers and other people's minds right now. So let's look at cybersecurity for a little bit. Cybersecurity is something where you have several lines of defense. And so the entity jewels or the core data are there at the center. And then your IT professionals will help put in place the architecture, the systems, the information security, all layered on top of that. But the area where most cybersecurity occurs is training through the people. Approximately 30% of cybersecurity incidents are through those open endpoints, the laptops, cell phones, et cetera, connected to your internet. So you need strong, very strong cybersecurity protocol. And you can have the best of all these layers, but the people, and if you do not train the people, the wrong social engineering or cyber hack will definitely impact your organization. Remember too, that as we look at cybersecurity is made of zeros and ones. That's how the language is developed. So all the meta, the AI, these are all human algorithms. And they're being programmed by friends, family, people that you know. And so it's really important to make sure that they are also developing these things with risk identification in mind. For safety, it depends on your organization, but safety checklists are important in terms of having manuals equated to OSHA or crisis management, for example. If you have labs, wet labs in particular, you've got to have certain checkpoints and regular lab inspections. If you're dealing with hazmats, you've also got to deal with the sustainability efforts of disposal and waste. When we look at all the things that can go or occur in a workplace, we look at fit for duty. Are you prepared to, we look at Amazon truck drivers right now. Are you prepared to lift a 50-pound box? And if you've been injured, can you lift it again? So be careful with OSHA training, US OSHA training anyway, quite extensive. You need a proper manual, you need proper training and regular training. For property, one thing that we see in addition to COPE considerations required by every insurer, it will be the type of construction, the occupancy, people and environment for COPE. They'll also look at square footage and pricing associated with that, whether or not you have any specialized equipment, particularly if you're building robots versus if you're in an office environment. They will look at where you're located. If you're in a hailstorm or a flood area, what can you do to protect yourself there? Flooding can be, there are things you can do to mitigate flooding depending on your campus or your area that you're associated in. And then have a business impact analysis conducted by your property carrier if you can, because it would allow you to know if we get that tornado going through our office and we have to be shut down for, say, or our factory, and we have to be shut down for 30 days or 60 days, how can we pay for that? And do we know how much would be lost in terms of revenue and supplies? A BIA will show you that. At one place, I knew we were probably at about 50 million a month, and it was about 30 million a month, and I knew when we did a certain rehab on the infrastructure, how much I wanted from an insurance standpoint for the people, the contractor doing the work. And their risk manager and I worked quite well on that. And then you want to look at loss runs. If you see that incident continually going each year and people just fix it, but they don't fix the issue and the root cause, it's really important for any of these risks to understand what the root cause, what is the where is the start of the problem. In terms of impact for a risk-aware culture from a board level, you want to see, and you can set the tone for the group or your entity to really have a risk-aware culture. I was charged with that at one place, go out and create a risk-aware culture, and had free reign to do it. And very proud of our team. They did a fantastic job going from 0 to, on a scale of 3, to about a 2.75 in about a year and a half. They were amazing. The other thing you want is, you always want to protect, again, the life, safety, reputation, finance, operations, and assets. If you do that, your corporation will be seen, or your entity will be seen, as a higher valued entity than those who do not. And so that can also help you get other business contacts, other business opportunities that create a stronger bottom line for you and your business. Be nimble, again, repeating that, because it helps you to manage the emerging risks. And that includes trusting the people that are on your team. Keep your name out of the headlines if you can, because we've seen that too often with certain things lately, some things that could have been prevented most readily. The tragedy, there are a couple of tragedies, but the one with the submarine and the Titanic lately, it will, investigations are being done, but you just have to wonder, could they have done a little better job on the risk side? When we look at managing emerging risks, again, there are always new things coming down the pike. No one ever intended to see certain issues that have occurred, COVID in particular. There were people who had planned it in certain areas of government, in government, but at the same time, 9/11 was something that we hope is a one-off. We see other things that we hope are one-offs, but there will be things coming around that the bulk of us wouldn't have thought of. But again, if you are nimble, you trust your team, and you're a well-trained machine, if you will be able to manage all of these quite well. And then when we look at governance regarding risk, so some of the questions you may ask are just a simple, what maturity level do you think your risk program is, based off of a 1 to 3 scale, or you can make it a 1 to 6, whatever you want to make it. But I think that helps people to think, do we have the things in place that we need? And if you ask that question, they may ask you what they need in order to make it better. Ask about the top risks. We had, with Sarbanes-Oxley back in 2004, people creating lists that were about 140, anywhere from 2,000 to over 100. And now the idea is, let's create something less than 10, and let's focus on 2 or 3 a year. I love the question that was asked to me, is there anything you want to share that's not in your report? Emerging risks, what resources do you need, and what market trends would you be aware of? You'll think of others according to your industry, but those are some good questions right there. And in summary, govern with a risk lens. Know your basic insurance, understand also, someone had said recently, when do I get a lawyer? Well, lawyers should come with your D&O policy. They should be thought of at the inception of that policy, not when you need the lawyer. So look at governing with a risk lens. including your contracts, et cetera. Encourage transparency throughout the organization, trust and listen, make decisions with consideration to risk and opportunities as well. And then be nimble. I always like to say at the speed of technology or faster as it's going. And then include risk assessments and take a look at one or two of those assessments. Maybe they share one or two with you each year.
Ellen, great. Thank you so much for all of this knowledge. I'm sure that helped to piece together some of the puzzle areas for many, especially as it relates to governance and the responsibilities that go with that area. So thank you very much. We'll get to Q&A in just a moment. Quick thing before we get to the Q&A, if you're looking to take your leadership and board knowledge much further, feel free to join the Becoming an Exceptional Board Director Candidate Education and Certification course, where you earn your International Board Director Competency designation. Topics such as governance, strategy, and of course, risk are all included in this program. So hope to see you there. All right, the questions are rolling in, Ellen. I can act as it is my job to be the moderator today, so I will act as the question moderator for you. Okay, number one, can you explain a little further the concept of a triangular report?
It is showing the length of time that it takes to close out a policy year. I said earlier that insurance policies are not driven by an annual open and close date, such as your regular accounting and your financial statements are. Rather, they stay open until the last claim is closed. So if you have, in this case, 10 years of open claims, that's a long time. Most are open and closed within 5 to 6 years. So it's a good indication of how long claims are staying open. The longer they're open, generally, the more expensive they are. And that's one of the key elements of your actuarial report as well.
Right. Right. The next one includes a question and a comment. In your opinion, are most executives and board directors well-versed in risk terminology and application? That's the question. And then the comment is, that is not my experience.
I'm glad you said that. Although I talked to a long-term friend of mine, we worked in corporate together years ago, and he has gone on to do many wonderful things. And I told him even he could be a risk manager, and he laughed. I would say he's one of the best corporate executives I've talked to regarding risk. But I am involved in a couple of different groups here in the area of Dallas, and they're very good groups, but I haven't had that confidence factor that they understand risk very, very well yet. Mm-hmm. So I keep wanting to think so. And there are a few who do, but not maybe to the extent that you wish they did. I think they think risk and audit are the same, and they're very, very different. Yeah, that's one of the big challenges in the board space also, is that if you talk about risk, the comment is, oh, well, audit, that falls within the audit committee. But we know that audit is not just financial. We know that risks are not just financial. And I'm usually the advocate pushing for a standalone risk committee in these boardrooms. I think it's quite valuable. I applaud that and echo that. Right. All right. Next question. You mentioned the topic of managing emerging risks better, such as AI, IoT, meta, digital transformation. With my board, how do you recommend I introduce these concepts, even though we don't have a formal risk committee? Get the risk committee. It's okay. Bring someone in that understands the concepts, and maybe you've got an IT person, or that someone that has at least a good knowledge of these areas, and help to understand that, again, you're working with things that are driven by humans who are writing code. So what kinds of checks and balances are they doing before throwing today I saw on the news, people in agriculture are having driverless tractors. So AI is driving tractors. And that's great, but someone had questioned it. It was sort of the plus and minus. What happens if someone gets a hold and hacks into the tractor and you can't drive it anymore, and your crop spoils? I think there's still plenty of tractors out there that people can drive, but at the same time, you have to think of things like that. If you put all your eggs in one basket, what happens if it goes wrong? And I could go into dozens of examples, but you get to be a little bit of not skeptic, but a little curious in this industry. There is a good group called XR Association out of Washington, D.C. that's doing a lot with Meta. They're all over in terms of training and different things. I don't believe they put a lot of risk lens to it yet. I would love to see that occur.
Right. All right. I have one more question for you here, which I think time will allow for. Here it is. Our board is definitely a little bit light on the risk insurance topic. I personally understand the link of risk to our company's reputation, but feel the need to push this topic with my board. Are there any pointers or tips you recommend in doing so?
That's a great question. I would say that if you can do some research and bring in an expert to help support your opinion, and as with all boards, I think it's important that you do some of the groundwork before you get in the boardroom. If you can get that support and leverage that in the board meeting, then I think you'll do well. We also have, I always like to say there are many examples. And so we have several just in the last 6 months that are huge. But I'll use an example of a group trying to, in a higher ed situation, trying to take a group to learn how to be NGOs and evacuate via helicopter. So they went to Romania, and we were first told they were using U.S. Special Ops and helicopters, and Black Hawk's fine, Special Ops great. Then it became Romanian with U.S. helicopters, then Romanian with Romanian helicopters, and peeling the onion over about 6 months or 3 months, it turned out to be Russian. Romanian with Russian helicopters. Helicopters fall. And so I shared with my board that while they decide what programs to run, this was an uncovered incident. And so the cost benefit analysis was one person dies when that falls, it'll be about a $2 to $4 million uncovered loss. And if you have 6 people die, you're going to have about 30 million to 50 million in losses. And so sometimes you have to be the no fun person at the party, but you have to tell it straight. And likewise, if there's that infamous file in the back room that Penn State had in the president's office, cost him $60 million.
Wow.
Transparency and openness is well. We can look at Bud Light right now, but maybe, and I don't know all the particulars, but maybe some checks and balances should have gone through before they advertised the way they did. And the consumer has spoken, and they've lost what, 15 to 20% of their.
It's last I looked, it was 26 billion as of today, so of market value.
Yeah. So I would encourage you to speak up. I'm happy to talk to you further about it, the specifics, but would encourage you to speak up rather than wait for something to occur.
Yeah. Yeah, and good thing we have your contact information up here as well. And looks like that's all the questions we had for today. Ellen, I want to thank you once again for joining us. Great topic, great background. You have quite an amazing expertise level in this, I know, from all of your previous roles and even your studies. So good for you. And thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great.
Thank you very much.
All right. See you soon. Thank you, everybody, for joining. See you next month. Bye now.